Hi and welcome. My name is Dick Rosen. I'm a Drexel alum from 1963, mechanical engineering. I left Drexel at that time to go take a degree in history of science, and then later came back to teach the history of science here for about 40 years, retiring about 2 years ago. I want to talk to you about my favorite thing, my hobby, the stuff I like to do instead of the workload that I had here. This was a special privilege I had. I loved baseball from the time I was about 7 years old. I went to my first game. Didn't know a lot of what was going on, but learned to love it. There were certain things that you get involved with in baseball. I grew up in Southwest Philly my first 10 years. We didn't play any baseball, but we played every derivative of baseball known to human beings. Box ball, step ball, wire ball, half ball. When our ball broke in half, we used it as another game. Or we took somebody's hose and cut it into 4-inch pieces and played hose ball. My mother, I believe, until the day she died, was looking for that broomstick that we used to play stick ball. I grabbed it out of the closet one day, ran off with it, and don't think I ever returned it. But I love baseball. My first experience in baseball was at Shibe Park. And Shibe Park created many emotional experiences for me. When you walk into that park for the first time, all you see is this vast expanse of green. Never saw so much green in my life at that age. We had a park nearby, but my park was the park we lived in had sort of brownish green grass. This was pure green grass and vast expanse. You got a warm feeling. I walked in with my father. Billy Crystal later on told a story, exactly the same story. He walked into Yankee Stadium when he was about 7 or 8 years old, holding his father's hand, and then all of a sudden was shocked by the greenness of the place. And the fact that he was holding his father's hand created this wonderful emotional experience that, of course, lasted for his lifetime. We all had similar experiences. We went to ball games with our fathers, our grandfathers. Even my mother took up some baseball and took me to games on Ladies' Day back in the late 40s and early 50s. It was a great thing. Everybody was involved in it. Billy Crystal also said, and I think this is one of the important ties of baseball, that when Mickey Mantle died, he knew his childhood was over. Now, what does that mean? It means, well, he was 48 years old when he said this, so that his childhood was over because Mickey Mantle was such a hero to him. He considered him his best friend, although he probably hadn't met him or had only met him briefly by that time. But that was the end. He now had to grow up because Mickey Mantle was no longer around. And I think we all feel that way about a lot of things in baseball. One of the things I've always been interested in is the kind of fantasies that we have. If you were a kid who liked to play baseball, you fantasized about a particular situation. The situation was what happened in if you were in the ninth inning of a World Series, 7th game, your team was down by 3 runs, you were up with the bases loaded, the count was 3-2, and we all acted out that home run that I hit, or that you hit, or that my friend hit. But without even comparing these notes, we didn't even necessarily talk to each other. We just all had a very similar, if not the same, fantasy. If you're a pitcher, you struck me out. But we don't like pitchers. We only did it as batters at that time. And so this fantasy continues all the time. You tried to live this wonderful thing. As I got to retirement, I wanted to go back and do baseball history. I thought about my past. In addition to being 10 years in Southwest Philly for the first 10 years of my life, when I was 10, I moved to Western Pennsylvania. And while I never played real baseball in Philly, I played baseball every day in western Pennsylvania. They had a small little town called Elwood City, not too far from Newcastle or Beaver Falls, if you know that area. And I grew up playing Little League Baseball and Knee-High League Baseball and finally American Legion Baseball. So for 10 years I was involved in playing baseball in an organized sort of way. And always loved the game, and liked to collect stories. I had an uncle who was a fan of the 1929 A's, and he taught me about baseball history. He gave me a list of all the players who played for the 1929 Athletics, which was, we can make a case, was the best team in baseball history. He kind of stimulated me. I can recite the names of all those players or batting averages even before I knew the names of my third grade class. But Philadelphia has its own history. We go way back. Very early baseball in the 1830s, 1831, there was baseball in Philadelphia. The town was running amok with baseball all over Center City. And when we talk about Center City, we're talking about between the two rivers, north of Girard, south to South Street. In that area, you were not allowed to play baseball at certain points, and the reason was people were breaking too many windows, kids were making too much noise, so the power that was decided no more baseball in Philadelphia. So you go to the suburbs. Now you cross the river, the Delaware River, into Camden. You cross the Schuylkill River into West Philly. And then you go north of Girard into North Philly and a little bit south. And most of the early baseball fields were in North Philly. It was a vast expanse. People hadn't developed it yet, and that's where they played baseball. By 1876, professional baseball found itself, and the National League was formed. The first team that Philadelphia had in the National League was a team called the Philadelphia Athletics. This is not the same team that we'll be talking about later, but this was the first thing. Athletics, since 1865, there has been a team in Philadelphia right through 1954, almost every single year, called the Philadelphia Athletics. It wasn't from the same league, it wasn't owned by the same people, but it was there. It was a terrible team. Finished the season 17 wins, 44 losses. So bad that they were that they decided they didn't want to finish off the schedule. They had to do a western swing, which meant at that time Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit. And they decided rather than spending all that money on trains and hotels and food, they would just forfeit all their games. But they had signed an agreement that you couldn't do that because the other teams, who clearly were having the games there, wanted to earn their keep too, and they were being deprived of a fan base and of income. So the A's were kicked out. They were kicked out, and so was the New York entry in the National League, so that the two largest cities in the country at that time did not have a team in the National League. In 1883, the Phillies came into existence, a National League team called the Worcester Ruby Legs from Worcester, Massachusetts. Were doing so badly. In their last two games, they had 11 people come to the next to the last game. 4 people showed up for the last game, and the Phillies bought the franchise and moved it to Philadelphia. It was done by this guy named Al Reach. Al Reach was a baseball player. He was a left-handed second baseman who was from Brooklyn, and he came to Philadelphia as almost the first professional player. He made a little bit of money, but he also was set up with a store, a tobacco store, candy store, first time at 4th and Chestnut, and later on at 18th and Chestnut. And if you go by Boyd's clothing store today, you can see this plaque right outside to Al Reach. Reach also became an entrepreneur. He started a Reach Sporting Goods company, made a lot of money in there, and stayed there and bought the Phillies and kept them for a while. On the other side, the National League wasn't the only game in town. By 1890, the National League was the only league. 12 teams, no interleague play. They just played each other, and then the top two teams maybe did a little bit of a playoff. But in 1901, the American League comes into existence, and the Philadelphia Athletics reassert themselves now as a team, and their mentor was a guy named Cornelius Mcgillicuddy from central Massachusetts. Now, of course, he was never known by this very much, although he never officially changed his name, but we all knew him as Connie Mack. Connie Mack needed to find a backer. And he went to actually Reach Sporting Goods and found the vice president of Reach Sporting Goods, which was, the company was located over in Kensington at the corner of Tulip and Palmer Streets, and Ben Shibe became the mentor. Ben Shibe bought 50% of the Philadelphia Athletics, Connie Mack owned 25%, and two reporters each owned 12.5%, and that was how the Philadelphia Athletics were financed. I'd like to just talk about this particular. I want to go through some of these players, some oddities that you see in Philadelphia baseball. Rube Waddell was a Rube. He was from upstate Pennsylvania. He kind of had very strange habits, but he was about 6'2", 250 pounds, left-handed, and could throw bullets. He had a nice curveball, but that was his main pitch, was his fastball. In 1904, he had 349 strikeouts, a record that was not broken until Sandy Koufax broke it for left-handers, and then Nolan Ryan broke it later on for all pitchers. Waddell had a little problem. His problem was he kind of acted like a child. He would come to the ball game, sit outside with the kids, and have games of marbles with them. Or if a fire engine went by, he was always accused of running after fire engines. We don't have any specific things that he did while he was pitching, but these things were all distracting to him. I once talked to a guy whose grandfather had a job with the A's, and his job was to go across the street to a bar and get Rube Waddell when Connie Mack wanted him to pitch, in case he wasn't at the game at that point. But we always knew where he was. He never got lost. He was paid in $1 bills because he believed that this was more money rather than larger bills. Connie Mack always sent his wife a special envelope with money in it because he knew that if Rube had it, it wouldn't get it. That his wife wouldn't get it. One of the real oddball players, I always had this wonderful picture of him with a 3-2 count on the mound, and a fire engine went by, and he went and chased it, but that apparently never happened. But he did lead parades down, and whenever there was a parade going by, Rube Waddell was there. Well, the A's did well, unlike the Phillies, who never won a championship in the first 20 years and more, about the first 30 years. The A's won the pennant in 1902. There was no World Series in 1902 because the National League and the American League couldn't get together. But in 1905, the Phillies went to the World Series. The A's went to the World Series, and in that World Series, Christy Mathewson pitched 3 shutouts against them. Chief Bender, an A's pitcher, pitched the shutout against the Giants, and then the Giants won the 4th game, so that actually the A's lost the series, their first series. In 1909, they decided to build a new ballpark. French Renaissance style, one of the first of many. The parks that followed were Forbes Field, Pittsburgh, and Tiger Stadium, or the Briggs Field at the time in Detroit, of course Fenway and Wrigley, and then at the very end, the last of these series was New York Yankee Stadium. It was a wonderful building. You can see this here. It doesn't look like any baseball field you would see today. The A's had pretty successful. They won the 1902 pennant, but didn't go to a World Series. In 1905, they won the pennant, lost the World Series. And then in 1910, 1911, and 1913, they not only won the pennant, but also the World Series. 1914, they won the pennant again, but lost the World Series. And by 1916, this team had become so dissipated, traded off, cashed in, and they recorded the worst record in modern baseball history. If you think the Mets of '62 had that record, think again it was the 1916 Athletics. One of the great phenomena of Philadelphia baseball was when the A's were doing well. This was 1910. The World Series was happening. These are the houses that are on the south side, on the east side of 20th Street. Here you can see that a little better. If you can see the people sitting on the wall, you can see the people on the rooftops across the street. They would go into these houses and they would invite them in. They'd charge them money. They couldn't charge them as much as they would have paid at the ballpark, but they charged them money. Recently, I met a guy who would, when these 1920s World Series were going on, who lived in one of these houses. And as a kid, he's now 93 years old, but as a kid, his job was to go out to the corner store and buy hot dogs, buy soda, and couldn't buy beer during that period, of course, until 1933 again. But he would be the person who did this. He would go out, charge a nickel for charge a dime for a hot dog, buy it for a nickel, bring him back, and make a few bucks on his day. Notice the amount of people. At one time, those things held 2,000. Those stands on the top held 2,000 people. They were designed by, I hope, a Drexel engineer, but I don't know, because they certainly never fell down. And then the people went there. The way you got to these things is you would go into the house, you go into the bathroom. There was a skylight in the bathroom. They removed the skylight, and then they put a ladder up there. And when you got up to the top of the ladder, you were on the roof, and then you could find your assigned seat or take whatever seat that worked. Now, one of the things we've done in Philly is kind of respected this history. And in Citizens Bank Park right now, out in the middle of center field, worst seats in the house, most uncomfortable seats in the house, there is something called the rooftop bleachers. You can even on the side of the building, it says Bud Light Rooftop. And these are a commemoration, a historical monument, you might say, although they function. If you can go to a game and you can get seats there, as I say, it's the worst seats in the house. But these are Philadelphia's specials. Now, meanwhile, the Phillies, rather than play at Shibe Park, they played at something called Baker Bowl. Baker Bowl was located between, 15th and Huntington, and also its other end, center field, was out by Broad and Lehigh. It was about 5 or 6 blocks from the stadium where the A's were playing. It was a tough field. It kind of wasn't 100% level, and because there were trains under there, subways under there, and they weren't able to really make it the way they wanted it. Now, the Phillies would actually move in with the A's. They'll move to Shibe Park in 1938, and will stay there until, of course, the end of that, which will happen when they move into the vet after 1970. I just wanted to talk to you about one of the great pitchers of all time, a guy named Grover Cleveland Alexander. He pitched for the Phillies from 1911 to 1918, and then, of course, in their infinite wisdom, the Phillies front office decided to trade him. In his career, he won 373 games, and in 1916 he had an especially good year. Had a one-loss record of 33-12, with an ERA of 1.55, and 389 innings pitched. He had 38 complete games and 16 shutouts. To get 38 complete games will take most pitchers today about 7 or 8, maybe 10 years. And then to also add to that 16 shutouts, or a part of that, gives you an idea of how great a pitcher this guy really was. The Phillies had him, of course, they let him go because they didn't want to pay him. Now, there's always a question about the 1927 New York Yankees. Who was the best team in baseball history? And almost always, someone will say to you, the 1927 Yankees. They had a good record. 110-44, but they had the A's behind them. The A's were a younger team in 1927. The A's finished second, but they were 19 games behind the Yankees. Nothing to write home about. But they were there. They were young. They were blossoming. They were becoming the A's that they would eventually be. The Yankees win again in 1928. This time the A's are in second place, only 2.5 games behind, so they picked up over 20 games on the Yankees. And keep in mind, these teams who are there don't have free agency, don't have trades. There are no mid-season trades here. Rare kinds of occurrences. So whatever the team was in 1927, it was pretty much the same team in 28 and again in 29. And this was true for the Yankees especially. But for the A's, they had young kids in 1927 who now were maturing by 1929. And the A's won the pennant with 104 games. Most significant, perhaps, is the Yankees finished second, 18 games behind the A's. The A's had picked up 37 games on the Yankees in a 2-year period, and that's quite a feat. So the question is, which was a better team? Sports Illustrated had an article way back in the early 90s called "The Team That Time Forgot," which talks about this 29 A's. That's perhaps the best team ever. Now here's some great Philadelphia players. This is in 1933. Philadelphia had 2 Triple Crown winners. In the National League, the man on the left was Chuck Klein. In the American League, the man on the right is Jimmy Fox. It's rare that you get 1 Triple Crown winner. We just had one a couple of years ago with Miggy Cabrera, but it's rare that you get 1. It's rare that you get 1 in each league, and it's even rarer that you get 2 from the same city. This will never happen again. First of all, Philadelphia's not a two-team city anymore. But these guys did an incredible thing for history. Now, also, I'd like to talk about Jimmy Fox, the man on the right. Fox is, a Hall of Famer, played for the A's, was traded to the Red Sox so Connie Mack could get some money during the Depression. And now you know him again for being a manager in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. If you saw the movie A League of Their Own, and if you remember the Tom Hanks character was modeled partially on Jimmy Fox. He had 58 home runs in 1 year. He was an excellent hitter. Had some problems that Tom Hanks expressed in that movie, but he was also in the 50s a manager there. One of the great events of Shibe Park is the Fundraiser in 1945 and early part of 1945. The war was running down. They were trying to raise money for war bonds. And somebody had an idea it would be a great stunt to bring out a 75 millimeter cannon, put a baseball in the muzzle, and then charge it up and then shoot it. In the middle of center field, there was a guy, and you maybe see him in the picture, who was a catcher. He was equipped with all the catching equipment, and he was ready to catch this ball. It was an almost a disaster. In fact, this guy was so scared he agreed to do it because he got paid a lot of money. But it was he could have been killed, of course, because when this thing was charged and shot, the ball sailed at about 150 miles an hour. Fortunately for him, it went over his head and then went flying against that scoreboard that you can see out there and broke the scoreboard. Sort of crashed the scoreboard and destroyed a corner of it. They decided to try it again. The guy was willing to do it again, and this time they could with less charge. It didn't go as fast. They raised about. I was told $500,000 that day with other events that went on. So this was a good thing for the bond issue. After the war, the A's began to retool. Ferris Fain, who won 2 batting titles over the years, even against Ted Williams when Ted was in the league. Eddie Juice, the shortstop, and keep in mind that Juice and Fain were part of a double play combination. Juice the suitor to Fain. Suitor was the second baseman. That still holds the record of 219 for the most double plays in the season. Robin Roberts came up around the same time on the other side, on the Phillies side. The Phillies were beginning to build. They had new management, new ownership with Carpenter after the war, and they were becoming a much better team. In 1950, they finally did it. That is, they became the team that everybody wanted them to be. The Phillies had won a pennant in 1915 and lost the World Series, but here in 1950, on the last day of the season, in the 10th inning, Dick Sisler, number 8 there, hit a home run. The Phillies still had to get out of the ninth inning, which they did. Robin Roberts went in there, and Ashburn made a spectacular throw to home plate. Here's Ashburn right here. You notice this is he's bunting. As he bunt down the third base line, the area between the foul line and the pitcher was called Ashburn Alley. And Ashburn Alley now, you will see that at the bank. If you go there, it's where all the stores are. A lot of food stores and a lot of other stores. 1964 Philly highlight. Jim Bunning pitched a perfect game on Father's Day. 1964 was not such a good year for the Phillies, although you thought it might be. They did have Johnny Callison, who hit a home run to win the All-Star game that year. But they fell down in losing too many games in the end. By 1980, the Phillies are building up here. This is Dallas Green, the manager of the team that was going to go to the World Series and eventually win it. They were now playing in a new stadium. That is after 1970, when Shibe Park, Connie Mack Stadium was gone, and the vet, which looks much more like a football field and was probably better suited for football, became the Phillies' home stand. This is a tribute to the last day at the vet. At Shibe Park, Connie Mack Stadium. This is Tim McCarver, Joe Horner, and George Myatt. Kind of posing in the dress of 1909, which is when Shibe Park would have been built. Here's announcers you may remember if you were a Phillies fan. In the forefront is Byram Som, who had been an A's announcer, and when the A's left in 1954, he became a Phillies announcer. Richie Ashburn behind him, and then way in the back there, Bill Campbell, who I think every Philadelphia sports fan knows from not only the Phillies but the Sixers and sometimes called the Warriors at that. They were called the Warriors at that time, and also the Eagles. He was announcing many Eagles games during the '60s as well. One of the people in that year, a man who was favorite with so many people, Tony Taylor, Cuban, second baseman, nice guy, good knowledge of the game, became a coach and even managed a little in the minor leagues. '64, of course, was bad. The Phillies were up by 6.5 games with 10 games left to go. Pete Rose was on the opposition that time, but by 1980 we had enticed him to come over and play on our side, and he was a lead there. By this time, the announcers had changed as well. You can see here Andy Musser, Richie Ashburn again, and of course Harry Callis, who recently died and was a favorite not just in Philadelphia but pretty much all over the baseball world in this country. Players who came out of there now are lefty Steve Carlton, who in 1972 came to Philadelphia, won 27 games. Philly's whole team only won 59 games, which means that he was about half of everything they had was in his arm, 27 games. Mike Schmidt, coming in as one of the best third basemen ever, and certainly well over 500 home runs. A very important asset to the Phillies. Larry Boa, who's returned to us this year again to coach. Noticed Boa's batting stance and also the grip he has on the bat, very short grip, and he had a good year in 1980 when the Phillies won the World Series, and he's now back as a bench coach for this guy. This is the guy that got away. This is Ryne Sandberg. Ryne Sandberg played for the Phillies around the same time. He was an excellent player, but young at that time. The Phillies decided they couldn't afford to keep him and wanted to get rid of him. They got rid of them, and he went to the Cubs, and then he rose prominently to become a Hall of Fame second baseman. It was a bad move on the Phillies' part, but at least now they have brought him back as a manager. I hope that it is a thing we need here. Here's some great events in Philly baseball history. This thing is what happened with the this guy. This is Tug Mcgraw, 1980. This picture was taken about 5 or 6 times because every time Tug Mcgraw struck out the last guy in the bottom of the ninth or in the ninth inning to win the game, he jumped like this. And so you can see many pictures. The most famous one, of course, was the one in the 6th game of the 1980 World Series when Willie Wilson, who had struck out 12 times, it was the 12th time he struck out, and the Phillies won the World Series. Philly pitchers like to jump. This is 1993. This is Mitch Williams, so giving us an incredible leap. What a remarkable athletic move that was. This was a game against Atlanta, which he did win, but of course he didn't win the game that he needed to win against Toronto. Rutledge didn't jump. He seemed to pray praise the heavens for whatever he did. This of course was the win for the World Series. This is when he struck out the last batter and became world champion. Some old guys that you might remember: John Crawford, good-looking guy, great, well-groomed, as you can see. If you remember, he played with a guy named Lenny Dykstra, who was even better groomed than he was. Crook didn't never. I don't think Crook ever put these big wads of tobacco in his jaw, but certainly Len Dykstra did. These guys brought the pennant to Philly in 1993, and this was the Mitch Williams event. Now, there's some other oddities that I'd like to share with you. This guy was called the Red Devil. He was a former MVP. And he wore a Phillies uniform until last year. You may not recognize him. You'll notice he's got a football helmet on. These were the old football helmets from when this picture was taken, which was in 1979. He wore this helmet, he told me, for about one day because he just couldn't hit with it. He was an excellent hitter. He was on his way to winning the Triple Crown in Japanese baseball. And that meant he was leading in home runs, he was leading in RBIs, and of course he was leading in average. The Japanese did not like him to be the home run king of Japan, and I don't want to accuse anybody, but he got whacked in the jaw, broken his jaw in 5 places, and was out for about 4 weeks. When he came back, he tried this helmet, which had been an authentic National Football League helmet at the time. Remember, this is 1979, and he eventually got over it. He threw this away quickly and went back to his old regular helmet. He did win the batting title. He did win the RBI title, but he did not win the home run title. He had been out too long and was not able to make it. He was able to make the other 2. This guy, of course, was the Phillies manager until last year. He was MVP not of the American or National League, but of the Japanese League. And of course, he's Charlie Manuel. Another guy that you know well, who's never much of a player. He played 1 year for the Phillies, second baseman, but he managed 2 different teams to 3 World Series championships, and he is this guy here is Sparky Anderson. Anderson never was such a great player. He was a good fielder, good field, no hit, and so he went on to managing the Cincinnati Reds, and then went on to managing the Detroit Tigers after this, taking both teams to World Series championship. This is a picture from 1950 World Series. Joe DiMaggio was in town, of course, for the World Series. Eddie Wake is here. Eddie Wake was a first baseman for the Phillies, and he had some problems. In 1949, he was invited into a room of a woman in a Chicago hotel when she shot him pretty seriously, hurt him, and he was kind of the model for the Roy Hobbs character in the book The Natural. Wakes came back. Joe D was there, but the Phillies did very little to put pressure on the Yankees. They lost 4 games in a row. Scores of 1-0, 2-1, 3-2, and then finally 5-2. They sound like the Phillies of today, where they don't seem to get too many hits. Now, I also put for this websites, if you want to go around and find some baseball information, baseballreference.com is a great one. Every player who ever played Major League Baseball is in there. You can get his record. You can get minor league record for some people. And also www.retrosheet.org. That's a great one. If you remember going to a game back when you were younger, and you remember your grandfather, your mother, your brother took you to a game, and you couldn't remember exactly when it was and where it was, but you remember who was pitching and you remember who they were playing against, you can go to RetroSheet and get that information. Every single game in Major League history they're trying to put on here. In some cases they have play-by-play, but it's an excellent way to find out these kind of little past histories. And also Baseball Library has a nice bit of information about that as well. If you have any questions or comments for me, please contact me by email. You can get me at either of these two email addresses, dickrosen@comcast.net or rosenrl@drexel.edu. I'll be happy to try to answer questions or discussions. If you have some really great baseball stories, I would like to hear from you. I love baseball stories, and if you're ever down in the Philly area, get in touch, and I'll be happy to, if you get a few people together, to sit down and talk baseball with every one of you. And I'll leave you with this great picture of Citizens Bank Park back in the final park, the place where the Phillies play now. There's a wall of fame. You can see the dates on it, and it's a beautiful venue that the Phillies won a World Series in and lost another one in. But we hope that they can pull it back within the next few years. I'm not too optimistic right now, but we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.